Kelsie.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm swell. I'm drinking coffee because it's only 10 in the morning on the West Coast.
Oh, wow. Later than that.
Thanks so much for being here today.
It's a pleasure.
Anyone who is out there listening, thank you so much for joining us. My name is Claire Martin. I'm the Assistant Artistic Director of Sweet Tea Shakespeare, and I'm thrilled and honored to be, yes, shoulders. I'm thrilled and honored to be joined today by my dear friend and colleague, Kelsie Blocker. Kelsie is an actor and a writer and stand-up comedian. She specializes in Shakespeare and the classical canon. I got to know her when I was living in Stanton, Virginia, home of Mary Baldwin University and the American Shakespeare Center was it the end of 2019? Was it literally just this past winter?
Yes.
Whatever. Time is meaningless. It feels like it was 10 years ago. But yes, this past winter, I was in Stanton playing Isabella in a fringe production of Measure for Measure. And I was working at the ASC. And I got to know Kelsie, who was a student at Mary Baldwin at the time. And we became friends. And she just totally dazzled me with her brilliance on and off stage. And since then, I've just been so kind of blessed to have an ongoing artistic relationship with her. In April of this year, she read for Sonia in War and Peace, a 2-part stage adaptation of Leo Tolstoy's novel that I did during quarantine, the first weeks of quarantine. And then in June, when I directed an audio drama, like a radio play of Dr. Faustus, she was my Mephistopheles, which was fantastic. And then this last month, again, time is meaningless. Last month, she played the lead. She played Proteus in our all women and non-binary actor Two Gentlemen of Verona, which we called No Gents, Two Gents. And she actually reunited with Amanda Fallon Smith, who had played Natasha with her in War and Peace. So it was fun to see those two together again. She also played Minnie in a one-act called The 19th by Hannah Benitez that was part of the Burning Coal's sort of celebration of the 100-year anniversary of passing the 19th Amendment. And upcoming, she is about to play Lucetta in Aphra Bain's The Rover, which we begin rehearsals for in, oh my God, like a week.
Some change.
9 days. No pressure. And I'm very excited to work with her again. So, as you can probably tell from that litany, I can't get enough of her, and it's just really great to have her on the show. So, yeah, Kelsie, thanks for being here.
Great to be here. Love it. Love it already.
So let's go back to the beginning, because that's a good place to start. I didn't meet you the first time I came to Stanton, did I? When I was a prospective student. I don't think you were there yet.
No, I couldn't have been there yet.
Okay. Because my first real vivid memory of you is I had hosted through Mary Baldwin a day-long workshop on the Henriade, Richard II, Henry IV Parts 1 and 2, and Henry V, which are my favorite plays in Shakespeare. I had sort of devised an all-women and non-binary repertory production for those 4 plays, and I had done cuttings of the plays, and I led a workshop on basically what happens when no cis male actors are in the room working on Shakespeare's history plays, which are totally male dominated. Even for Shakespeare, they're male dominated. And Kelsie came and read for some characters, which was marvelous. And at some point on that day, that workshop day, we had just a discussion, I think, about roles, Shakespeare roles and Shakespeare types. And it was a really great discussion. And it was how I got to know you and Tim and a few others kind of in the program. And I just remember you brought up several points about sort of, about being a Black woman sort of navigating the field of classical theater and your roller coaster experiences. and it was so I don't want to say eye-opening because nothing you said really shocked me, but you were so articulate and you had such insight into the field in a way that I just didn't. And as a director, I'm always trying to think about casting and think about type in a way that is progressive. But there's always so much work to be done, and there's so much sort of white privilege and sort of white systemic stuff that is blinding me. So it was really good to get your perspective on navigating the field. And then after that, I don't know, I just remember us just kind of being friends. It didn't feel like we sort of slipped into that very easily. And then when I left Stanton in December, like we just sort of kept in touch digitally, and then reconnected for War and Peace in April. So like I would just love to start kind of with your, I don't know, maybe your experiences, early experiences with Shakespeare, the Bard, like how you got into Shakespeare, like where you find yourself in the canon, like what speaks to you, what excites you about his plays. Let's just start there.
So the first Shakespeare play I read or saw, of course, was Romeo and Juliet. And I saw Juliet and I was like, I'd be having problems with my family too. This is me. And so it was initially kind of glomming on to Shakespeare's ingenues, weirdly enough, and seeing myself in them.
Yeah.
And so subsequent experiences where I was exposed, to people who often have to play ingenues and have to inhabit sort of that limiting confine of that particular archetype. It was a complicated experience, right? Because I saw myself as this fun, bubbly, youthful, like whatever type personality, right? And since I'd say maybe 11th grade, I've been cast as, tough, either macho woman or macho man, depending on the length of my hair.
Sure.
So that's been something that I worked through. There's also historically, I often talk about, I'm acting like I have like material out where people will know what I often talk about. But there's the whole thing about historically, the masculinization of Black women.
Yes.
Where historically we were viewed as unwomen and like more of like the conduit for the workforce. Our wombs almost like a factory line.
Yeah.
That's a grotesque image. But anyway, so all of that kind of swims around in my head, as I think about the way that I'm cast, the type of roles that I want to play, and all of these sorts of things. It's a lot to kind of navigate, It is, I think, important for actors to be able to see both the commonalities between them and the character that they're playing, but also where they differ. And that's definitely been something that I have had a hard time navigating, because I sometimes give, and I think that this is probably common of a lot of performers, is that we sometimes give others the ability to tell us who we are or how we're perceived or these sorts of things, right? Maybe they're seeing something that I can't necessarily see about myself.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is integral to the idea of typing. Is that you may view yourself as this brooding, artistic, cool guy, and everybody else sees dimples and a button nose. And they're like,
sure.
So I think that this is something kind of that everybody has to navigate. But I think the complex relationship between classical texts and people who look like me specifically really kind of exacerbates it.
Yeah.
For me specifically. So now that I'm done with that, I don't remember what your second question.
That's okay. I should only ask one at a time. That's my own fault.
I can only hold one idea in my head at once.
Totally understand that. So, I mean, Juliet is like such a gateway drug if you're a woman and you're falling in love with Shakespeare, because she's so great. I mean, she's incandescent and she's such a badass. And her text is just beautiful.
Yes.
And she just goes on such a personal journey. You really see her come into her own and develop some steel, and it's just always kind of a joy to watch. So what are other plays and or roles that specifically speak to you now, or have maybe become more important to you recently? Like what in the canon really kind of jumps out at you?
Well, I was really interested for a long time in playing Cleopatra,
Mm-hmm.
but that was more of like, I also have a weird thing about the intersection between like blaxploitation characters and like Shakespeare characters. Weirdly enough, it
Totally.
really comes up with me for Aaron the Moor,
Mm-hmm.
because he's like very hyper masculine, and like we're not really sure about his motivations for things, but he's got the spirit, like
Yeah.
he's ready to really fight anybody. And so I guess coming up with those images of, like Pam Grier and like the Afrocentric idea of Cleopatra, I thought that might be a fun thing for me particularly to bring to that text. But that's more in like a style sort of realm. Some roles that have become really important to me now are roles like Puck, and Mercutio, some of these breeches parts that kind of directly sit on what I'm talking about my experiences as a classical actor, about that gender weirdness, gender weird.
Is that can that be our new designation? I'm gender weird.
I don't know. You figure it out.
I love it.
I don't know what it is. Just, but yeah. So those have been really important to me. Certain characters, like I like to study more from like Lavinia is really interesting to me, but I don't know that I necessarily want to play her.
Sure.
Lady Macbeth is really interesting to me. And I feel like I would be struck by lightning if I was like, yeah, if somebody wanted me to play Lady Macbeth, I don't think I would do it. Like I think that that's sacrilege.
I would love to see your Lady M.
Yeah. I'm agreeing that you would love to. But anyway, yeah. So I think that there are certain things that are more like academically interesting to me, and there are other ones that I'm like, I want to rip that apart and inhabit it and get in there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What's fun to me about Mercutio and Puck, if I'm thinking about those characters on any kind of Venn diagram, is that I mean, they're both, you need the clown, you need to be able to crack the jokes and absolutely like live it up, but also there's this darkness at the edge of both of them, and a lot of times that's what makes the humor so potent, because there is this like streak of, be it like malice or disillusionment or cynicism, or like there's something that is shading the comedy. And I think it's different for each of them. I don't think that what troubles Mercutio is what troubles Puck, but I do think that they have this there's this like shadow at the edge of their kind of like vibrant technicolorness, which is part of what makes those characters so fascinating, because it just feels like there's so many layers to peel back. You just can never get to the center of them. And I suppose you can say that about Lady M to a certain extent. But while I do contend that Macker's is the funniest play Shakespeare ever wrote, I don't think she's intended to be like fully, I stand by it. I don't believe she's intended to be like an actual like comedian on stage, like to sort of deliver the laughs the way fucking Mercutio do.
Sure.
I don't think that's her job. I think in that play, I think it's Malcolm's job, which is why Malcolm is my favorite character, full stop. But but I do I mean, yeah, I think Puck and Mercutio are really wonderful examples of like boundary blurring, type blurring. Like they just occupy this really liminal space. You can play them so many different ways, and anyone can play them, and you'll get a totally different story based on who inhabits the role. And so those are really exciting characters. How do you feel about Troilus and Cressida? Because we've talked about Cressida before. Is that a role where you're like, I want to get inside that, or you're like, that is a role I want to study? Like that's a play that I want to look at academically.
Well, I definitely want to I frequently throw the gauntlet down with Shakespeare, from Beyond the Grave. I'm like, hey Will, it's time to throw hands. I've had it. But definitely from I think a feminist perspective, that I think could probably bear its way out through how that role is embodied, right? Is I think that that a lot, I don't want to say we, I think that some people have a tendency, and I've done this in this conversation, to be overly simplistic about female archetypes. And so I think that if Cressida is played as someone with agency, historically, a lot of the idea has been that she's the unfaithful lover or she's all these sorts of things. But if you get in there and you pay attention to some of these parades that happen on Cressida, right? Like a parade of kisses, a parade of men wherein another man is telling her how she should feel about the men.
Yeah.
It's like, where does she get to stretch her legs and actually kind of just there is that, glorious, hard to seem one speech, right? But I definitely feel like, as someone who gives a lot to physical embodiment of characters, it may be something useful now that you're asking to actually embody that, especially in an environment where you can have a relationship maybe with the audience.
Sure.
To sort of be do y'all see what I yeah. And there's also, there's the context of a war going on. So there's I don't know. Now I have to write a Medium article about this that 1.5 people will read.
One person and one person is there dozing in bed.
Or there's one person and they're halfway telling someone who loves them a lot but doesn't quite care. But yeah, I think both. I think it might be cool to be Cressida and also to wax poetic about Cressida. Write her a love ballad. She's been through it.
Something that's send Cressida to the spa, for God's sake. Just let her have a spa day at an all-women spa.
Yeah.
Just let her get away for a while.
Cressy needs a break, a folk song.
I would watch a whole stand-up piece about what we can do for Cressida to atone for the absolute imposition of men that are just thrust on her in that play. So I love what you said about how it's very formative for you in creating a role to inhabit it physically, and that is something that you and I have talked about a lot because you have experience with fight choreography and you're just extremely sort of at home in your body. You're really good at dropping down when you're acting. And for the past 8 months, 5 months, whatever, time is meaningless. We've been living in a world where we can't embody characters live in front of other people with other people. You and I have become very adept at figuring out how to get high quality performances in which the text is very clear and the message is clear through voice alone. And so, you know, with Dr. Faustus, with No Gents, Two Gents, I would love for you to talk a bit about what it was like for you as a very physical actor and someone who sort of specializes in that, coming to Marlowe's text and Shakespeare's text without your physical toolkit, and what it was like trying to try to adapt for the radio play format.
So, well, you mentioned fight choreography, and I think anybody in the program at Mary Baldwin would know, like Kelsie is good with comedy. Don't give her a sword. If you're gonna give
You're right. I'm sorry.
sword, make sure, like, we got to get some extra practice sessions.
Okay.
But yeah, so what's been super useful has actually been watching interviews with people who do a lot of voice acting, and they talk about just doing the thing anyway.
Yeah.
If a character is like lurching into something, or there are particular things that affect the way that the breath moves through the body, it's very difficult to like fake it. And so something that has been very funny for me has been when we do particular Zoom recordings, and I'm just like tossing myself. Everyone else is sitting there very calmly and professionally, and they're just limbs just throwing themselves. I look like I'm on a ride at Six Flags. But so that has been very, very interesting to navigate. Another thing that's been super weird has been sort of, how do I say this? Normally when I'm in an actual rehearsal, I can get like a sense of like the energy, right? And what you can, when oftentimes when actors are about to say their lines, you can almost feel it before they do it.
Yeah, totally.
And the fact that Zoom and things don't allow you to like even talk at the same time.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm like in the, like, this is probably an insensitive metaphor, but I'm going to say it anyway. Nobody can fight me. Like, it feels like I'm sort of like in the trench, like waiting, like listening, waiting for it. It's a different sort of, it adds another shade of unpredictability, I guess, in talking on Zoom, is that once you get used to the, in normal rehearsals, once you get used to the volleying back and forth, you can kind of, I'm going to say my line, now they're going to say their line, and they're going to raise their eyebrow, and I'm going to be offended by that, like that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Zoom, like, their dog might decide that now is the time to go for a walk. Like, there may be a thunderstorm, they may lose their internet. So there's something that's really useful about that, though, because it gives it a different conversational quality. It makes it more tough to sort of plot out and go in autopilot and do that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So Zoom is challenging, but I also think it has its benefits.
Yeah. I would agree with that. I just we did William Congreve's The Way of the World in July as a radio play, and one of my actors dropped out last minute, so I ended up reading for one of the characters. And it ended up being such a transcendent joy because it was one of my dream roles, and I didn't think in a million years I would ever get to play it or read that text. So it was so, it like just totally made my life. But what I found was that, kind of like what you were saying about Six Flags, like by the time we got to recordings, I was so used to her that I would just kind of drop down and I would just gesticulate the way I thought she would, and I kind of would like move around and, you know, toss my hair, and I would just move, even though I was seated, because it's what made sense. And I absolutely did feel that kind of unpredictability of not knowing exactly when my scene partner was gonna finish his line and trying to be ready for it, but also not knowing, like, knowing I can't interrupt you. I have to sit here and take it, even if what you're saying is mildly offensive, sir. And it really was like it is no substitute for the real thing, but I am willing to concede that it is a different kind of cool thing. Getting to watch someone through a screen and try to figure out, like, how do we conjure chemistry? How do we create this connection when we cannot do it with these nonverbal cues that we have access to in a rehearsal room. And I actually found so much like glee in just like experimenting and in getting very good at like trying to read like my scene partners through a computer screen. Like if you don't have access to like their breathing rhythm, if you can't tell when they're about to speak, like you watch more carefully, you listen more carefully. And I do think there was a kind of liberation, because we all felt like if we didn't make big, bold choices, if we didn't just fully inhabit the character, however ridiculous we may appear in front of our computers, that there was this potential for a different kind of connection. And I'm now in post-production for all of these audio dramas and working with my team. And the thing that is astonishing to me is that you can actually hear in people's voices that they were looking at each other. Like you can hear it. And it's a weird kind of synesthesia thing. It's hard to explain. But I know that a lot of times these radio plays in the past, and when you're talking about like animated movies, for instance, like these lines are recorded individually. Actors come in and read. They sometimes hear a recording of someone else reading the lines, but they're recording by themselves. And obviously you can get great performances out of that model, especially if you're working with professional actors. However, it is different when you are listening to Audacity files that were recorded while actors were looking at each other and trying to read each other through a screen. And so with No Gents, Two Gents, for instance, like the best takes are the ones where I could tell that there was some kind of eye contact happening, even though it was through a screen. Because you actually can hear that visual communication. It's just, yeah, it's a brave new world, but I think there's some exciting stuff going on.
I've been sort of thinking about what characters would be really, really tough to sort of try to embody or to try and act through this particular medium. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of there's a lot of different factors, because I know everybody doesn't come at acting from the same, but I don't know where I was really going with that. It was more just me thinking out loud, but yeah, anyway.
I mean, it might be, I don't know, you read for Sonia. It might be harder to play very shy, introverted characters. Because if you're playing someone who's very shy and introverted on stage, you have so many visual tools to use to indicate that they're not comfortable around people, and that that they are present, they are listening, they're imbibing the information, but they just don't really want to speak up in front of everyone. But in an audio format, in a Zoom format, but especially in an audio format, if you don't hear someone talk for a long stretch of time, you could just forget that they're there. Whereas
That's true.
Whereas the person who doesn't talk much in a play, you would never lose sight of them. They would always just be on stage.
Yeah.
But in I was thinking, like, what would my War and Peace be like if you just heard it? Well, people would be like, wait, which one is that? Whenever Sonia talked, because she talks so infrequently, and she goes long swaths of time without speaking. And if you're only listening to the lines, you would be like, wait, there's someone else there? Like, I wonder if the format is less inviting to characters that are less forthcoming.
Mm-hmm. That sounds right.
So what has, like, I mean, you can get as specific or not specific as you want, but like, what are some of the things that you have sort of continually like bumped up against or run into in terms of like casting personally, and I would like to talk about type, and I would like to talk about like who is doing the typing, how they are doing it, It's just deeply problematic, and also like what might be best or better practices moving forward, so that the people, the bodies and voices in rehearsal rooms are not only diversely representative, but also empowered as actors of their own identity in the room. Because I think that sometimes there is there's like a neutralization that some directors try to impose on groups of actors. Like, and I guess a pretty baseline example of that would be a director says, yes, I'm going to have a company that is more than 50% cisgendered male actors, but all the women that they cast as like soldiers, and then they don't let them change the pronouns, right? Like the women are just playing men without names or many lines or real identities, and they have to play them as men. So yeah, like it's a big sort of existential question with lots of moving parts. You can sort of tackle it however you want, but I would just I think we should talk about casting.
Well, I know for me, casting is a whole great big another Medium article. I think that there's the complication. There are I've had repeated incidents wherein I've had to tease out of someone that they're wanting me to kind of ethnic it up, as far as how I'm speaking, or adopt a particular accent that may not necessarily be natural to me. That's complicated. It often comes with characters of lower status, which is also complicated because there are rich people in South Carolina, where I'm from, or any place where you have where one may have the idea that people who speak a particular way lack a certain level of depth or intelligence. We all contain multitudes, right?
Right.
And I think that really is the thing that I try and get at when I talk about this, is that you may see someone who has a particular body type or has a particular type of voice. And I do think that the lines of the body, particular tones of voice, they do communicate things, right? But I think a big complication about that is that there are people who inherently are viewed as unconventional or weird, abnormal in some way, right? So going back to the black thing, there is a big movement right now as far as female empowerment being the whole capable, intelligent, tough, athletic, that sort of thing, right? But when it comes to characters that are being played by Black women, we've seen all of that already. There are whole, like if you look at things like Vine, TikTok, any real like YouTube, a lot of these mediums masculinizing Black women or toughening up Black women, or not allowing us the full breadth of humanity and femininity has been going on, right? So when I see a Black woman as the jailer's daughter, or Juliet again,